Hi all, I have another fascinating encounter for you today. Stockfish, the mighty #1 engine in the world, is playing white this time against Leela in the Robash, not rubbish, Robash modern defense, sometimes known as modern defense. So e4, g6, d4, bishop g7, knight c3, c6. These are the opening book moves given to both. And here Stockfish chooses bishop c4, and you might think this is a bit surprising, but d5, you might think it was controlled by these two pieces, the d5 square, but in fact there's a little tactical trick here. Stockfish takes on d5, but there's b5, which is gaining tempo, two tempos, one on the bishop, but one to play this, and then relieve the pressure on d5. Yeah, if c takes, just bishop takes d5, this is just a clear pawn up with a big advantage for white. So this is the idea. b5, bishop b3, b4. This has been seen before in over the board chess. Knight c e2, c takes d5. Knight f3, knight f6. Now here, Stockfish decides to play a3. This does cast some pressure on the a7 pawn. That could be a vulnerable pawn on the semi-open file. On the other hand, when this happens, there's pressure down the b file as well to consider. B takes, rook takes a3, so activating this rook. Black castles, white castles, knight bd7, rook e1. In a high-level over-the-board game, knight e5 has been played before. The Grandmaster Fatchik against Snyder, so Fatchik 26-10 against Snyder 24-20. That was in Vienna 1996, which was a win eventually for white. So that's with knight e5 here. But in this game we see rook e1, knight b6, and now knight e5 here, so no possibility of black even considering taking on e5 at the moment. So what's the point of knight e5 here? It's actually a really nifty idea behind this. It's not just tactically to think about knight c6, but defensively to be able to neutralize the pressure down this b file potentially, because the knight can support b2. So white wants to have its cake and to eat it, to have pressure on the a file without too much pressure to parry on the b file. We have knight g4 challenging this knight. So we have the knight coming back to d3, so it is looking at protecting, but it's also got an attacking role as well potentially with knight c5. We have a5, c3, which means that the bishop can come back at some point, but it also of course reinforces the d4 pawn. That's pretty solid here now. The knight goes back, bishop c2, bishop f5, h3, as though there is a concern maybe about this bishop on f5 being a potential target to moves like g4 in the near future. In fact, with e6 this is even more of an issue now. The bishop hasn't got a retreat square. So we see bishop f4. Now knight c4, the pressure starts on b2 a bit, but white is well prepared to handle it. Rook a2, queen b6, and now you might think this is passive looking, but yes, the knights actually just reinforce each other here with this move, which reinforces b2. So there's adequate pressure on b2, and the bishop is controlling b8 here anyway. So it's actually difficult for black to put more pressure on b2 that easily. We see rook fc8, and now g4. And this is very, very interesting after bishop e4. White plays a very, very technically advanced move here, in my view. You might think f3 is possible. This actually is not so good after e5. Whatever way this is cut, because bishop takes, knight takes, knight takes, bishop takes, queen takes. There's queen takes d4 check here, and this should be an even position. And let's have a look at f takes e4 instead, then e takes e5. This position is also quite useful for black to equalize. So it does seem as though f3 is not really cutting it here. On knight takes e5 instead, sorry, bishop takes, knight takes. Let's have a look, instead of instead of bishop takes here, let's have a look at knight takes. There is knight takes b2, and again this position should be about even. So Stockfish's move actually gets out of any tactical liabilities relating to the kind of invisible tactics that are kind of evidenced in this variation by playing bishop c2 to get this bishop out of the way as a tactical target, you know, for that bishop takes c2 in some lines. So we have rook a7, as though there is still an interest maybe in getting some pressure on this b pawn, but here things kick off. f3, bishop takes, knight takes, knight d7 is played, and now it looks as though this is really quite nice. It looks as though, well, the bishop's been unveiled, so e5 might actually be on the cards in some lines. At the moment, e5 seems to be sufficiently controlled, but this next move is dual purpose. It's attacking and defensive. King g2 unpins the d pawn, but it also makes way for a pawn chain attack. This pawn chain isn't so solid, especially with the absence of the light squared bishop. Sometimes even a bad bishop adds to the solidity of a pawn chain, and it seems Stockfish now has got an incredibly powerful plan, especially with this bishop without a counterpart, to try and damage this pawn chain. And we see what happens now. Queen d8, we have queen e2. It's like every move almost is directed to this pawn chain. Either the head, well, the two heads of the pawn chain in particular are under scrutiny. This knight b6 encourages the bishop to drop back, but now under scrutiny, this one, this is the pawn chain head, which is now going to be under scrutiny with h5, and it's not possible for black to take on h4 because of g5 trapping the queen. For example, bishop d6, black would have to give up the queen, and that's not very good. That's a winning advantage for white. So we have bishop d6. Yes, this pawn chain is under scrutiny now. It's official. Bishop takes d6, knight takes rook h1 with the idea of h5. Very, very logical play from Stockfish. a4, and black's queenside pressure has amounted to nothing at the moment. There's no real pressure on b2 at all. So it seems, yeah, Leela's in big trouble here at this point. Queen f6. hg, chipping away at the pawn chain, hg, and queen f2, a very, very nifty move indeed. The idea of this, sometimes the queen will pop in to h4 to look at, you know, the king side squares. So we have a3, and now another move putting scrutiny at the heads of the pawn chain. Knight e6 now is looking at e6. Yeah, and you might think, so there's 2 pawns under scrutiny here from the 2 minor pieces. Yeah, and there's also the possibility of rook h6 to add more pressure to g6. So Leela's under huge pressure. That pawn chain around the king is a valuable shield, and it could be stripped away. And also you will note that there's no dark square bishop, so these dark square weaknesses around the king are more pronounced. So without the dark square bishop, we have knight b7. On knight e8, it seems as though rook takes a3 is just going to be a good position for white. This endgame is just a pawn up for not much. It's just a good advantage there. So we have knight b7. And here, a really incredible move is played. And this does really demonstrate, actually, especially Stockfish can play some super beautiful chess. Can you guess what white plays if I give you 5 seconds? It's a really advanced tactic, but it's positionally motivated in a way to undermine the pawn chain around black's king. And that move is knight takes e6. Fascinating tactic. On queen takes e6, then there's a weakness of the last move. It's not covering h4, and in fact, queen h4, you might think, well, what about the check? It doesn't do anything. So this check here is just slaughter time. For example, bishop takes g6, check, queen takes g6, and once the whole shield has been taken away around the black king, this is not very good. What happens? It's not very good at all. Yeah, black just gets exterminated in this variation and ends up losing all the material, etc. So yeah, it seems queen h4, there's no real defense. If king f8, white casually here plays this to just get control of the e file, to cut out the escape square, to make this a lot more effective, any check a lot more effective. So for example, check, and yeah, white's just going to go to the e file, for example. There's no real stopping that, because black's pieces are actually the ones that are so-called spectator pieces here. They're all just spectator pieces. This is just horrible, and in fact black could end up losing material like this as well. So it does seem as though queen takes e6 hasn't got a lot going for it. Let's see, rook a8 trying to ignore it. There's just g5 nudging the queen away, then queen h4 with the same kind of effects. In fact, rook e1, this one just controlling that e file, is pretty efficient in this line with a big advantage. So it seems as though queen takes is not possible, and you might think, okay, what about f takes? Let's look at f takes now. So on f takes, rook h6, yeah, it's like destroying a pawn chain from its head, or heads here. King f7, rook takes g6, and once the shield's gone, then, especially with these pieces just huddled over here, real spectator pieces, the queen and rook are more than sufficient to cause a lot of damage here. This, yeah, if this is the best move, then that's not very good. A good situation is not a good situation. Yeah, the b pawn, okay, the rook can sacrifice itself, and the queen with the pawns are just winning here. So it seems a very, very powerful move, knight takes e6. A bolt from the blue, as some classic annotators might have said. Bolt from the blue. Knight c4. We have now g5 just nudging the queen away from protecting h4 by force for this queen h4, now threatening checkmate. We have king f8 getting out of there. On queen e2 check, yeah, this really doesn't help this position. There's this very casual move here and it seems to leave, even if there's a check here, it doesn't matter, nothing matters. Now this is a good, tactical line, because rook takes, knight takes is check. White here just plays rook takes e3, and after queen f1, bishop f5 check. This is a very, very tactical line, just opening up the queen for coordination on e7, and say king c6. Yeah, the black king is just hunted down in this line. There's too much pressure, and this is a neat trick as well. So it ends up a total rook up here with totally winning position. You might be asking in this position, hold on a sec, not so quick. Hasn't black got a takes b2 queening? White has rook takes e8, and on queening, check. Now if king c8 here, then that wins the queen. Rook a8 check forces the queen to drop back, and we just take the queen rook up. And also in this line, let's have a look at king d8. There's actually rook h7, and the two rooks are still winning here against the queen. If check, then the king goes to e5. If check here, then king f6, and there's no more checks. So that's the end of black, because rook a8 is coming. So that's pretty clear. And you might think, well, hold on, what about the check on b8? Was that anything to explore? Not really. The king just goes to g5. After check, the same sort of thing. King finds a place where there's no more checks. So that's a winning position for white. So in the game, queen takes e6, yeah, queen h4. We have king f8 instead of throwing in the check. Rook e1. This essentially wins the queen in this configuration, is it's cutting off the escape square of the king, and there's going to be queen h8 checkmate if the queen, moved. Just to put that on the board, this is certainly a checkmate. So we have queen takes e1. Here you might think, well, hold on, knight e3 check, there's king f2. If knight f5, there's check. And then actually queen takes c8 is best here, casually, with a big advantage. So in the game, queen takes e1, queen takes, the knight comes to d6, b takes, rook e7, queen h4, check, king g1, king g8, we have queen f4, knight e8, rook b2, knight takes, rook takes, yes, white's got a material advantage, and now it's the passed a pawn, which is a key trump card here, check, the rook tries to get behind it, but now queen e5, rook e8, there's no point trying to defend the d pawn, it seems, because this kind of thing with rook b8 is simplifying in white's favour with a big advantage. So rook e8, we have queen takes, and it looks for a moment actually the rooks might be a little bit dangerous because they're coordinating soon. We see that there's a bit of coordination, but it's not really cutting it here. The two rooks and knight don't really cut it enough. If, for example, check here, king e2 check, the king can just escape like this to c4. So we have check, and now king g7. On check here, there's actually king h3. For example, check, rook h2. Yeah, that second rank can be used as defense. So black tried king g7. Leela's in big trouble with this queen, because actually it can also potentially be used as a defensive mechanism once f4 is played to control key squares. Check, and there's no point in playing another check here. Rook takes g5 was played. If rook h1, rook h2 again, so rook takes g5, but that f4, which of course opens up the defensive role of the queen. Check, the rook's at least, well, okay, they're coordinated for a moment. Check, but it's leading nowhere. Check. And you might think, well, there's a lot of checks though. King g1. We have rook h1. On knight h4 check here, check, there's just king g3. This configuration, the checks are basically running out. Yeah, bang, queen takes h1. So yeah, that doesn't really help. So rook h1, we have queen a3, so coordination of the queens begins, the extra queen. It's played to the death this game, no adjudication. Check. On rook eg1 check, then king f2, the king just goes over here. So it's gone really, the position. It's actually gone. Check. Here, so the queen's controlling h1. Rook takes f4. We have now white on the offensive with the checks and absolutely winning, scooping everything up, or rather actually efficiently, not trolling actually, just efficiently checkmating. Okay, I thought it was an enjoyable game. Leela's still evolving, and Stockfish is the world champion of chess engines and can play beautiful chess, and for the moment is my #1 analytical assistant. So a lot of the beautiful variations that I put in videos are, you know, Stockfish. So I'm not against Stockfish. I just find Leela also a super fascinating thing, and it's great to have competition for Stockfish for greater and greater versions. So we're in a really fascinating time for computer chess, a really fun time, and it's only fair to show the beautiful Stockfish wins, of course. If you enjoyed this video as much as me, then please click the top left box, which should appear shortly, to become a member at chessworld.net to play other YouTubers. So that's my reference code 1053. You can also check all the YouTube analysis here in advance from the improved menu, learn from the masters, and then you click YouTube order, you'll see all the analysis, which sometimes gets updated. Okay, comments, questions, likes, shares, subscribes, all appreciated. And if you do subscribe, remember to click the notification bell. Thanks very much.